Hello everybody, this is Leslie Pelch at the Vermont Center for Geographic Information, and we're going to go ahead and start our webinar in just a minute. Just going to give maybe one more minute for a few more people to show up and register, or sign in rather, and then we will get started. Okay, we've got a pretty good showing today. So welcome to the promise and the reality of free and open source desktop GIS software with Shane Bradt from UNH. Before we get started for real, I just want to very briefly do a little intro to make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of how the webinar interface works. So hopefully you can all see my screen, which shows a few bullets and this little icons that you can click on. And I want to point out the most important one is this orange rectangle with the arrow in it. If you click on that, that will make your panel that's showing up on the side of your screen either collapse out of the way so that you can get it so it's not blocking your screen, or bring it back out if you want to use some of the functionality in there, like the questions box. So practice with that a little bit. Make sure you understand how that works. If you have questions, you're going to use that question box where you can type in your questions. And I just show a couple other things that are, there we go. So your question box is right here. You'll just type in the question and send it to me. It'll come to me. And if it's a question for Shane, I'll probably hold on to it until towards the end of the webinar if it's one that needs to be answered right away, because his meaning is going to get lost if he continues on. Then I'll interrupt him and pass it along. Also want to point out that in your panels you can open up your audio panel to make sure if you're having any issues with sound, make sure that you've got your audio mode chosen appropriately. And then there's also the audio setup box that you can open up for additional information. I think that's where you'll find if I can get it open up, there we go. That's where you'll find the phone number if you have changed your mind about how you're going to connect. The final thing I want to point out over here is the raising your hand button. If everybody could click on this little button that looks like an orange hand with a green arrow to let me know both that you can hear me and that you are understanding kind of how to use your panel here. Great. Thank you very much. And let's see. The only other things I want to mention are that, as I said, probably the questions will save most of them towards the end, and then they'll come, but you can send them at any time because they do come to me. They don't interrupt Shane, so you can send them as soon as they come to mind. And then the final thing is that we are recording this webinar, and it will be posted at the VCGI YouTube page. And I just want to show you our YouTube page. We've started posting all of our webinars here that we've recorded. So if you check back here in about a week, probably by the end of this week, but maybe early next week, and I just want to point out how you get to that YouTube page if you have a hard time searching for it. If you go to our events page, you'll see the link to the event archive. And if you click on that, you'll see webinars. And although they're all listed here individually, the link actually just takes you to the YouTube page. Okay, and I think that's all I need to say. So I think I'm going to pass control over to Shane at this time.
All right, I guess we're going to have to figure out which screen, as we said.
Oh yeah, that was the thing. All right, I'm seeing grass.
Grass. That is perfect. That's exactly what you're supposed to be seeing. You don't see anything else, correct?
Nope, just grass.
Okay, great. And just finishing up one last quick thing here. Perfect. Okay, well, thank you very much, Leslie, for hosting this and inviting me to talk a little bit about free and open GIS software. I will start out by saying that my job at UNH Cooperative Extension, which I'll just quickly show our web page so people can see where it is really to look out at the vast frothing sea of geospatial technologies and try to figure out, from a non-commercial or non-vendor specific standpoint, what people of New Hampshire could use. And instead of having people scramble through on their own and try to figure everything out, we're coming to provide information so that people can come in, get some idea of what it is that they might want to use, gain some skills, and then go on their way. And as you can see at the top of our page here, we are involved heavily with Esri teaching as far as our courses go, a lot of our training materials, although we have no official affiliation with Esri. And part of the reason that we've done this is because that is what GIS users in New Hampshire, and let's just say it, probably around the country, are using generally. But one of the problems I had as a new person in Cooperative Extension was that a lot of our conversations I had, especially with small New Hampshire towns, ended about GIS when they found out how much it cost. And so what I wanted to do was look around and try to figure out, are there ways that people can get into GIS at no cost at all, at least from the software standpoint. There's still going to be time where people have to learn how to use the software. They have to decide why they even care. And of course, then there's the tricky part about making sure that they have all the data in place that they need to do whatever project they wanted to do. But I set out to figure out for myself, and hopefully so I could share this with others, what's out there at no cost. Now I had expected, and this was back in about 2006, I had expected that this would be easy information to find, that I'd come across the website, that there would be these lists with pros and cons, and there just wasn't. So I had to do a lot of investigation on my own, installing software, trying things out, and what we're going to talk about today are the results of those efforts. Now, I will say that I am not the world expert when it comes to GIS. Oops, and there we go. GIS, free and open source GIS software, but I think I've probably thought about it more than most. And my hope in this presentation is just to show you some of the basics, some of the things that I found, give you an idea at least of what I think from hopefully an objective, although probably somewhat subjective standpoint, what the best options are out there. I am fully willing to admit that things change over time with this technology, that there might be other options, and I'm always looking to improve or to add new information and new software packages to evaluate. I'm also looking probably to drop a few of these, and I'll share with you in a little bit something I found out today, which will make me factor out one of these right away. But feel free to ask questions. Leslie, and again, as she stated, she might interrupt if it's necessary, and otherwise, my plan is to go through this presentation, which is about 20 minutes at the most, talk through some of the things I found, and then be ready to field questions and possibly even show people software if they're interested. So one thing that I wanted to do, of course, is before I started on the search to figure out what type of software packages are we talking about. And the beauty of working in the type of job that I do is that I get to set the parameters. I was thinking about people who typically attend our workshops in New Hampshire who said that they couldn't afford sort of the standard GIS desktop software packages. What would they want? And I thought at first the software really had to be free and not a demo version. So we've all had experience with software packages that you install, and then 30 days later they ask for $19.95 so you can continue to use them. This could definitely not be it. 2, the software can be installed by typical computer users. Now, that means that there's some sort of install file that you double-click and you follow through the install procedure as a normal software, and you don't have to worry about building libraries or doing anything from the command line. And why is that? Because for our users, if they have to do that, they're just not going to do it. So this actually excludes some of the most commonly used GIS or open source GIS software, or at least some of the longest running open source GIS software such as GRASS, but for our users, that was not something I thought that our people were interested in. 3, the software is functional at a GIS capacity. It can load GIS data, it can do queries, it can view attribute tables, it can do the types of things that GIS software need to be able to do. And also that the software is not just a single function software package. It doesn't just import images, it doesn't just deal with GPS, or it's not tied to proprietary layers that only that software package can read. Now there are software packages out there that are very nicely integrated systems where you buy the software and all the data from a specific vendor, but that's, to me, wasn't a replacement for the desktop GIS software that I was looking for. And also that the software does not require internet connectivity to function. Now, if it does have internet connectivity, it's okay if it has additional functions, but does not require it. So you could just have the software installed on a laptop out in the field and not have to worry about internet connection. Now, for about a year after I started this process, this single slide was the only thing that I produced. And I tried to update this today with the most up-to-date version numbers, but this is as far as I got. I was able to identify a suite of them. Of course, I need metadata for my chart, but the operating system, if it's the little flag with multiple colors, it's Windows. If it's the little smiley face, it's Mac. And if it's the penguin, it's Linux. These are what the software packages I identified. You can see that all of them are free, meaning no cost out of your pocket. But something that's very important in this area of GIS, which is something I didn't appreciate at the beginning, is really differentiating between free and open source software, because some of these are free, but but a subset of them are open source. I also noticed that GBSIG had a mobile version, which they continue to develop. I put it there not because I have experience with it, but only because it seemed to be something that stood out in this space. Of course, the difference between free and open source in a nutshell is that free means no cost out of your pocket. You don't have to put any money down in order to acquire and use the software. Open source means that the software source code is freely available online for anybody to look at and download, compile, and use. The mentality of the open source community is that there shouldn't be any restrictions on how these software packages are used. So there should be no licensing concerns. You should be able to distribute them, share them, even modify them yourself however you want. Now, in some people, they're just concerned about something being free in the terms of money, or other people are very interested in having it being free in the terms of open and allowing people to do whatever they want to. So that's just, it's out there. Why would some of these be free but not open? Well, I looked into each of the business cases, and I'm fairly sure that there's no reason why these companies would start to charge for them because of their business plans. And on the other side, is something free just because it's open? Not necessarily. You could look at different types of Linux, such as Red Hat, to know that it's not necessarily free just because it's open, but usually if they do charge something for open source software, it is for an extra service they provide as opposed to the software itself. And also because the source code of these open source software packages are freely available. Let's say that Window GIS decided to charge $400 for each download of its software. Anybody in the world who had access to a website could take that same source code, stick it up online, and say, that's fine. Come over here. I'm not going to charge you. And they would be completely within the rights of that open source software framework. So I bring this up only just so that people have this idea that they're different. I didn't hear for a lot of people in New Hampshire calling for open source software. They were more interested in the free, but especially once you start to delve more into this world, this can be an important distinction. So for about a year and a half, this is as far as I went. I identified these software packages, sort of trolled occasionally looking for updates, and I wasn't really sure how to proceed from here, because there's no way that I could develop materials for 9 different pieces of software. And when I went to look for training materials on the websites, either they were non-existent, or if they were there, they didn't quite fit what I wanted, or they were there, they might have fit what I wanted, but using training materials developed by different people within one workshop trying to compare software packages really didn't seem to be that effective. So in order to figure out what I needed to do next, or what I could suggest from some sort of objective standpoint that might be worth people's time investing to learn, I had to try to winnow down this list. So the first thing I thought about was, well, how are these packages different from one another, or is there a way to characterize these different packages? Well, first thing is that several of these were made just for viewing GIS data. So you can add data in, you can query the attributes, you can make a map, you can do lots of different things. You can export images, but you cannot edit data. They were not designed for editing data. There is one GIS package out there, which is a data viewer that's not designed for editing, although there are a lot of statistical models that can be run within the software. So Diva GIS sort of fit into its own category. But all the rest of these software packages were designed both to view GIS data and to edit GIS data. Now, they all have different capabilities, different processing, but they were designed to be fully standalone GIS software packages that you could use to do all of your GIS work. So this began at least the process of narrowing them down a little bit more, because it allowed me to start to think about what the differences were between these and to think about what would I suggest that people invest their time in. And part of my job is supposed to be doing this sort of process, presenting the reasons why, so that people who are interested in trying free software can understand how I got to a certain point, but then can choose probably among those few, as opposed to being panicked like I was and looking at 9 different software packages and not understanding which way to go. So the first thing that dropped out right away for me were software packages that couldn't edit data, because I saw people wanting to have GIS software but not being able to afford it and having that be the end of the conversation. If you're going to buy one or acquire one type of GIS software, it might as well be able to edit data. That being said, for example, with the GIS Viewer, you might want a GIS software package on somebody's computer in your office or organization and not allow them to edit data on purpose. Maybe you don't want them making changes to the data that they could then use in a way that you don't want them to use. So there are reasons why you might want these viewers. But for my course and for our training materials, I decided to drop those. And I will also say that Arc Explorer Java Edition for Education probably wouldn't be considered really a modern GIS package at this point. It certainly has been very much de-emphasized by Esri. The reason that it's free is that it was their one software package historically that would allow teachers, for example, to be able to use GIS in the classroom. Obviously, a lot of things have changed. It's still on this list, but keep in mind that it's probably one of these that has been left behind. So the next slide just drops all of these, except for the ones that can view and edit data, which turn out to be the vast majority of these free and open source software packages. So then the next step I had to do was to try to figure out, okay, out of these, how do I make a decision about what to suggest for people to invest time in and for us to develop materials? So I used to have a whole bunch of slides where I went through all of these different features. That was one of the first areas that took me a long, long time to get my head around. But in the end, I realized that even though I had all these slides, there was only a few features that I really used to make these key decisions. First of all, could this software package add data from the web? Now, I know that a requirement to be on this list was stated already that said that the software did not have to have internet capability or have internet access in order to function. And none of these do. But in the world of GIS today, it's clearly more and more important to be able to connect to data on the web when you have internet connections. So I thought this had to be a critical piece to put out there for people. And I've done my best to catalog all the different ways that these can connect. Some of you might not have heard of all of these. The real important one, of course, is bolded, this WMS. That is by far the most common way that data are shared online, coming from servers such as BCGI and Granite, which is the New Hampshire clearinghouse. So these were a critical thing to highlight. Also, can it handle multiple projections? Now, this might seem strange to people who are relatively new to the GIS game, but in the past, it was very difficult to deal with multiple projections inside of a single software package. Until ArcGIS appeared on the scene, Esri software had a very tough time. And so that, to me, had to be a key critical feature. And you can see all of them can handle multiple projections and do it on the fly, with the one exception of FGIS, which can reproject a la ArcView 3.2, but can't handle multiple projections. And then another choice was, can it handle the types of imagery that you have in your states? So in New Hampshire, there's a lot of SID files that are floating around there, around there as imagery. And I know in Vermont, there's JPEG 2000. Can it handle those files? And you just have to ignore the asterisks for a second. Those were notes to myself. But all of these software packages, if they say JP, JP2 or SID, according to the package, it supports those files. And another thing I just threw out there was DEM files, whether or not those digital elevation models files could be supported, because there's lots of people who want to look at things like viewshed analysis or watershed analysis. And at least in the United States, a lot of those files are stored as DEMs. Now, the other files category was something I just happened to note to myself as I was moving along, and this is something that I should really go back and update. I did notice a few of them supported KML files directly, so there was no import procedure. You could just add them right into the file. And a few of them even evolved the ability to support the lower level of the geodatabase. That is something, of course, a file format that was developed by Esri. For a while, it was the actual format was not shared publicly, but I think it was maybe about 2 years ago they opened that up. So more of these have begun to support some of those types of files. So in the end, there's a couple of key things that knocked out several software packages. One was FGIS, because if it can't accept things on the web and it can't do multiple projections on the fly, that this really wasn't something to suggest people invest a lot of time in. Part of the reason this is true is because FGIS, due to some licensing issues in the past, was frozen at the version in 2005. So you can still go today, download FGIS from 2005, but you can't get the more modern versions, which are only used internally in a state agency in Wisconsin. So probably the modern version of FGIS, if you could get a hold of it, would do those things, but the one that's available freely online cannot. Also, this made me a little bit leery. UDIG did not support some of these other files, especially SID files. And for me in the state of New Hampshire, if a GIS software package can't support SID files, then we really can't suggest that people use it. I will also say that in my experience with UDIG, I was able to edit a table in a database, in an attribute table, without going into editing mode. I could just click on the cell and start editing. And there might have been a strange way that I set it up that made that possible. And I'm happy to hear from anybody who uses UDIG that knows otherwise, but that made me a little bit leery about trying to trust that, because I really feel like you need to have your data protected, so you have to consciously go into editing mode, make edits, and save it, since editing the attributes has such a powerful effect on your data integrity. So these I just dropped right away to get down to these 4. Now, I found out this morning, and you have to love working with technology, I found out this morning that AccuGlobe is no longer available for download from DDTI's website. So I'm willing to check into it, see what's going on. My guess is that they potentially changed their business model, or maybe they're having a new software package that's coming out, but I used to have a slide on AccuGlobe, and I've removed it from the presentation just a few minutes ago once I realized that you are no longer able to download it. So what I'm going to do in the next few slides is just look at these 3 software packages, the GBSIG, Map Window, and Quantum GIS, to give you a little bit better understanding of how they work. And also I'll just say that there's an error on a few of these slides where GBSIG is not listed as a Linux OS supported software, and in fact it is. So GBSIG, which is open source, actually all 3 of these now are open source, is supported Windows, Mac, and we can get rid of that question mark because it's true. Mac and Linux are all supported with GBSIG. It's produced by a government agency in Spain, which, if it existed in the United States, would be similar to something along the lines of the New England Department of Infrastructure, Transportation, and Environment. They recently changed their name. So it's a big government agency that has jurisdiction over several provinces or states within Spain, and all of the infrastructure planning, transportation planning, all of it is done in GBSIG. And the reason that they developed the software was to have free GIS software for engineering use. They looked out among what existed at the time that they developed this, which was in the range of, I think, 6, 7-ish years ago, and they decided that nothing fit the bill, so they hired a local university in Valencia to write the software for them and made the software and all of the plugins and everything that they do available through an open source license. I would say that there's lots of different plugins. They've really taken a lot of emphasis in reaching out both inside of Spain and around the world to try to get different capabilities into the software. Occasionally there's a few Spanish words here and there. I think they've gotten much better at it, and I've actually been involved with trying to help them along the way of cleaning up some of the translation. This is a truly international project, and there's lots of people around the world that are collaborating by using it, but also trying to help with translation. And I think that is something that is much better now than it was in the recent past. And if you're wondering, SIG is GIS backwards, because in Spanish, the way that they would say it would be System of Information Geographic. So that's what the SIG is in the title. Window GIS is another example of an open source project. This one runs only on Windows. It's a I think it uses DirectX, which is a very Windows specific type of tool. It was originally produced, I think the Utah State University, and I think, as far as I can tell, sort of the efforts in it are based in the University of Idaho, Pocatello. And the idea was that they were looking for free GIS software to have a GIS toolkit that they could use that would have lots of very powerful integration with different types of plugins that people could develop, and was also fast. So they wanted it to be optimized for data access, and some of the plugins on Window GIS are pretty slick. In fact, we have a class that we used to teach, Making Maps the Google Way Reloaded, where we talked about converting KML files to shape files and shape files to KML files to help in that GIS Google translation, and Window and some of its plugins were the ways that we actually told people to do it, and some of the materials on our website reflect that. From what I've seen, and this could just be based on my own personal experience, but from what I've seen, when a government agency in the United States at the federal level chooses a free open source GIS software to focus on, it seems to be Window GIS. Although that may be just due to the presentations I've seen or personal preferences of the people I happen to know. Quantum GIS, again, open source. It has OS support Mac, Linux, and Windows. As far as I can tell, there's really no central organization that's responsible for its curation. But the reason this was developed was to have fast, free GIS software for Linux. So obviously, it's one of the reasons it's kept its Linux tradition, but as more people in the open source community are trying to gravitate towards having everything open source, including their operating system, you can see that it's important to have GIS software that runs natively on Linux. It seems to support a lot of different data formats, and for people who are really like GRASS, and I mentioned GRASS earlier in the presentation as one of the granddaddies of the open source GIS software movement, which may not be so nice and fuzzy for some people. You can access the GRASS capability through plugins inside of Quantum GIS. So if you wanted to have sort of full-blown or mostly full-blown GRASS processing capability, but you didn't want to have to learn GRASS, you could always download that plugin for Quantum. And it may even come as built-in, but it is a plugin you have to turn on, and then it allows you to access those capabilities. So what I had done in the past then was to go ahead, and AccuGlobe has disappeared from this list, but AccuGlobe was one of the software packages that we had in our workshop, and develop materials, hands-on materials for all four, but now I'm going to focus on these three. And these are available on our website. They are not the current version of the software. I need to spend some time updating them soon, but they certainly will give you an idea of how to use each specific type of software. And how I developed them was to think about what are the first 5, 6, 7, 8 things that a new GIS user or somebody who knows how to use GIS, another GIS software program, would want to know about a new software package they were evaluating. So how do you turn it on? How do you create a map document? How do you go ahead and add layers? How do you zoom to layers? How do you look at the attribute table? How do you use data in the attribute table to influence the symbology? Just a few beginner steps along those lines that hopefully would allow people to go ahead, think about what it is that they want to learn but also to be able to compare the GIS software side by side. So if you look at the table of contents in each of those, they're pretty much exactly the same series of steps, but how you accomplish those steps, of course, are based on the specifics of that software package. And if you know how to use one software package in GIS, it's relatively easy to learn how to use another, but everything is going to have slightly different ways of storing information, accessing information, and of course, if you've used one software package a lot, it colors in your brain the way things are supposed to work. So instead of thinking as a user, well, how should GIS work, you're comparing it to whatever program that you're most comfortable with. So I thought that these materials in this course that we teach could give a good way for people to get started, be able to sit down, have a test drive, figure out which ones they're interested in, and then maybe walk away knowing, okay, I want to use Map Window or GBSIG or Quantum GIS. So these, although you can find all of these just by Googling them, this was my attempt to try to get all of the websites in one place. And as we all know, websites change from time to time. And but feel free to go ahead and Google these. I just like to have this all in one place for people to look at. I'll leave that up on the screen, although since this is recorded, once it's posted, people can always come back and look at this again. The only one that's a tiny bit tricky, I think, would be GBSIG, and the reason it's so long is because I put down the one that's in English. The website's available, I think, in about 7 different languages. So if you just went to gbsig.org/web, it would launch you into GBSIG's site, and then on the upper right-hand side of the page, there's little flags, and when you click on the flags, the language changes. So if you wanted it to be English, you could go to this exact link, or you could go to the main page and then click on the little British flag, and it would switch it to English. And just as the final thing, a couple of quick, if you're interested in knowing more about what it is that we do here in UNH Cooperative Extension for geospatial technologies, the top one is a direct link that goes to our page on the extension site. Obviously, it's just one that I purchased to make my life easier directing people there. And our website is currently undergoing some modifications and changes, but no matter where our page winds up, I'll redirect this link so it'll go straight to ours. And one of the things that I've been working on over the past few years, and hopefully start working on a little bit more in the next year, is a group called Map Assist, which actually the A in Map Assist is an @ from Arobi, like in the email addresses, but that doesn't work for shortcuts online. This one will bring you directly to a page that talks about Map Assist, which is a collaboration between extension folks across the country and other folks, other like-minded people who work in geospatial technologies, to try to bring together common interests, also common content, and to collaborate on issues of GIS, GPS, remote sensing, anything along those lines. So if you're curious about what this means, if you're interested in being involved, or even trying to get a handle on what it is that Cooperative Extension is trying to do in this new digital age, this link will bring you to a page that describes our geospatial technology group. Feel free to get in touch with me directly if you would like to know more. And that's really all I have from the presentation side of things. So I'm ready to open it up to any questions that people have. People wanted me to open up the software, look at it. Of course, all these things are free, and you can grab them on your own and try them out, but I'm more than happy to do whatever people are interested in doing.
So this is your chance, everybody. Send in some specific questions. While people are composing their thoughts, I actually want to steal back control for just a second and point out, I will give it back, I promise, and just point out that that because I was exposed to Shane's presentation about that big overview of what's available for free and open source, I used that information to make my own decision about what VCGI should offer in terms of training on free or open source software. And as you may have noticed, actually down in the webinars, we have done a bunch of QGIS webinars this year because during the summer I do some training on QGIS. So I educated myself about, sorry, I'm in the wrong place. about QGIS and do a very introductory, sort of about 9 hours of training, very gradual, about QGIS. So I just wanted to show you that there's some links on our web page to information about that training, and also all the chapters in our book that we use, our training workbook, are posted on there. But they are also the same topics pretty much that we're covering in our webinar series this winter. So if anybody is interested in actually getting into this a little bit, you can take a look at the materials we have posted. You can go back and look at some of the recorded webinars as well. So I just wanted to put that out there. Okay. Oh, no, all we've gotten so far are congratulations for doing a good job of providing an overview. Oh, here we go.
Oh.
What kind of geostatistics are these packages capable of? Asks Dean.
Yeah, so...
Oh, here, let me give it back to you, sorry.
Oh, okay. Oh, it turns out a disturbing amount. Of course, it depends on exactly what software program that you're using, and also I think a lot of the capabilities provided by these can be accessed through plugins, which pretty much all are free. Sometimes they don't come pre-installed, and you have to search them out and install them yourselves. But I can go and just open it up and show you a few things, like for example on Quantum GIS or GBSIG. I did want to point out, just as Leslie did, that there are we have training materials available on our website. I actually think probably that the QGIS training materials that Leslie has are better at this point than ours, since she's taken it much further than we took it in our workshops. But if you go to our website and click on training materials, or you scroll down to educational materials, not sure what our website will look like in a month, but somewhere on our front page it will be there. What we've done is put together a download system where you have pretty much every GIS, GPS workshop that we teach that you can download, and they come with the manuals, the presentations, all of the data. The only thing that we ask is that people fill in a little bit of information just for our own internal knowledge, A, to see who's using it, and B, if we do update the materials, to be able to send out, for example, when we update our ArcGIS Driver's Permit 10 to ArcGIS Driver's Permit 10.1, having people's emails helps me to reach out and let them know that a new version has been created. And when I do update these GIS on Pennies a Day test drive packages, I'll do the same thing. So let me just talk a little bit about the processing capabilities and some of these. This is Quantum GIS, and even just by going and looking through the menus, for example, here's already a raster calculator. In Vector, here's some types of analysis tools, so you can do line intersections, nearest neighbor. You can have some random selections. There's a bunch of geoprocessing tools, buffering, intersection, union, clip, dissolve. You can see some of these as well for geometry, and also data management tools, which you can define projections, bird shape files. So there's obviously, even just by looking through this quickly, there's a lot of things that these open source software packages can do. And just to look at some of the plugins, if you go down to, for example, in QGIS and manage plugins, you can see that there's a whole bunch of them. So you can add limited text.
And that's what comes with, like
Yes.
This is just what comes in automatically when you download and install it. There's more out there that you can go searching for.
Yep. GPS tools, raster terrain analysis, there's a ton of them that are out there. That's why my chart that I had was a little confusing, so I was trying to stick to things that just came installed and turned on by default, but there's so many different things you can do. And for example, that vector menu is populated by a lot of these F tools, which, as Leslie stated, this just, think F tools just comes as part of Quantum GIS. You don't have to do anything except open it up and check this box, and it loads it. So there's a lot of different things that they can do. I will say that Quantum GIS and also GBSIG are probably neck and neck. GBSIG might edge it slightly in the total amount of stuff that it can do. I know GBSIG's worked a lot to pull in a lot of these other open source packages, and some other autonomous regions in Spain have developed software, and they've sort of rolled it into theirs. So there's a lot. I would say the only one that didn't have that was AccuGlobe, which now appears is not available, so it doesn't matter. But they were able to do, I think, maybe buffer and intersect or clip. There were a few things that they allowed people to do, which was shocking to me. That software was always shocking since it's commercial software for free that could edit and do some processing. But I'd say all three of these open source packages can do, I won't say anything that you need them to do, but it's going to be a long time before you run out of things they can do. Now, whether or not it does the exact thing that you need it to do is, of course, another question. I mean, one of the things I just posted today on our Facebook page was that GBSIG's newest version came out. They had updated their network analysis extension. So you think about what you can do with network analysis in, for example, ArcGIS, and you can imagine some of the things that you could do with GBSIG. I will also make a statement that sometimes it doesn't hit people in the face, but notice not only is this vector processing, it's raster processing too. So in a lot of their commercial packages, the ability to do raster processing costs additional money on top of the cost of the package itself. I think partially it's just because this is open source. They want to have it do as much as it can do. It's also due to the fact, I think, that a lot of data in the international databases are stored in raster data because it's a more efficient format of storing it. And we're pretty spoiled in a lot of ways in the United States with the type of data management that we have and the type of data layers and its availability. And I'm not just saying this because VCGI is hosting the webinar, but when you go to a lot of other countries, it's very difficult sometimes to find GIS data, and a lot of the data might be these international data sets, and most of the time those are in raster. So if you have a software package that doesn't let you do raster analysis and you're working in an international sphere, it's really hard to do even some basic stuff with it. So it's another reason that these open source software packages have such potential. Now, will it do the exact same thing that every packages or other commercial packages do, or will it work the same way, or does it give the same exact results? That's sort of all up in the air, but this at least gives you an idea of the types of things that are out there that you can do.
Okay, so we have a few more questions. Which of these software packages are used by the most agencies or companies that you know of?
I'm glad you said that you know of, because that completely biases the answer, and it probably is just due to my own bias. I think, I don't know, I can't even answer that question. From my own experience, and from even, I went to present at the GBSIG meeting last fall in Spain, and I was talking to them a bit about this. My impression is that from a federal government agency standpoint, a lot of the open source software stuff is based on map window. I always say it wrong, map window. It seems like in general in the United States, in North America, Canada, when an open source software package is being used by other people, it's often Quantum GIS. I think if you're looking in Spain, obviously, but even in Latin America, and other places in the world, but specifically, especially Latin America, the GBSIG is the most widely used. And in fact, at dinner I sat next to the group of people from Argentina who coordinated the Argentinian GBSIG users group. And there was an individual users group in almost every single province in Argentina that had these meetings, and they have national meetings. So I think it's kind of hit and miss, or it's hard to say. It kind of depends on who you are and what you're focused on. But I feel pretty confident saying that all three of these have sizable user groups.
Yeah.
And because of that, they also have support on their websites. They have meetings sometimes, and I don't think any of these three would be a bad choice, but I think it kind of depends on the circle that you're living or operating inside of as to which one of these would be the one that more people were using.
Yep. There's a couple of questions that are related, and I'm going to read both of them since they're related. Okay. But they're different. How much memory does it take up on the PC, and is it slow to display the data? And then the other question that is very similar is that I've used QGIS on several different PCs and have found it to be slow, even if I zoom way in so the program's not having to draw a lot of parcels, especially with parcel data. Do you find this to be so, and if so, how do you deal with it?
It's funny to me because a lot of these seem faster to me.
I know. I think they're faster than ArcGIS.
Well, I'll just say, I use, for the vast majority of my GIS work, I use ArcGIS. I use all of these to a certain extent, but I still, working with a lot of people in Extension, and our partners use ArcGIS. I've found them generally to be faster on the same computer, and I think it's just partially because of the, sort of the high overhead with so many things that ArcGIS can do. And I think one of the reasons they have these plugins is because you can turn off plugins, just like you can turn off extensions in ArcGIS. And that helps because if something's not loaded, it doesn't spend the time dealing with it. I would say that QGIS on the Windows and the Mac side are different in that they seem to be developed by slightly different groups of people, more so than at least GBSIG. And one example how I know this is because there was one version of QGIS that came out that had Mr. SID support, and then on the Mac side it didn't quite have Mr. SID support on that same version because they were using different tools within the Mac OS and the Windows OS to be able to support those images. So you could also get into the whole situation of 32-bit versus 64-bit and the total amount of like space on your hard drive that you have, and if it's virtual memory and swapping. It's really complicated sometimes to nail down why a software package is slower than others. I haven't noticed Quantum GIS being significantly slower. I will say that I have not spent a ton of time using Quantum GIS in the Windows environment. I do, unfortunately, AccuGlobe disappeared because I did compare AccuGlobe directly to ArcGIS looking at the same imagery when I first started using it, and it was shockingly faster. I think part of it is just because it has less overall requirements. I mean, obviously, there's minimum requirements listed on these websites most of the time. Sometimes it's hard to find that, but
yeah,
I'll just ask Leslie what she thinks, since she has certainly used Quantum GIS on a PC far, far more than I have.
Yeah, and I think you're right that it's faster than ArcGIS just because that's my only real comparison. But keep in mind that I have a computer that was purchased to be able to handle ArcGIS. So I would suspect that if people are finding that it's slow, it has more to do with just the basic requirements of GIS software. It's as you said, it's like high overhead software, unfortunately. And so if you have an older computer or if you have a computer that was really a little bit light on processing capacity or something, I think that it's going to be slow no matter which one you choose if it's real GIS software.
I'll put at least a shape on here so people won't have to stare at a blank
the blank screen. Even though it's
an upside down.
Turn it upside down, right?
Exactly.
Okay, so there's a few more questions coming in.
One other quick thing I
go
wanted
ahead.
to say just very briefly was, people ask me all the time, what should I do for my computer to make it faster in GIS? And I'm not a world expert in this, but two things. Get more RAM helps, and if you have an integrated graphics card in your computer, get a standalone graphics card. Now, on a laptop, it's hard to do that after you bought it. In a desktop, just even the cheapest standalone graphics card will be better than what they call the integrated graphics, where sometimes it's hard to tell that on the specs, but they'll say something along the lines of 448 megabytes of shared VRAM. Means it's basically stealing RAM from the rest of the computer to draw things on the screen. And that seems to be by far the biggest change you can make in your computer. That just slows the whole computer down, but especially when you need to draw things on the screen, that swapping back and forth of the RAM and using it virtually as the VRAM instead of having an actual dedicated chunk of video RAM seems to make a difference.
Yep. Let's see. Horace has a good question. How do the packages compare in map composition and output? So map, what's the other word here? Making maps, actually visually making maps is what he's talking about.
Anybody who's used to, let's say, ArcGIS is not going to be happy with how this works, for the most part.
If you have high expectations,
yes. It's just, I will say that cartographic representation and the ability to produce a professional finished-looking map is something that still heads and shoulders the commercial software outshines these. That doesn't mean you can't do it, but it means it is set up differently. You're going to have to relearn how to compose the maps. All of them can do it to a certain extent. They can all put north arrows, scale bars, legends, but it'll take you some time to relearn how to do it. And sometimes it's in freaky places that you don't expect it to be. We've been so beaten into this sort of layout and data display that like QGIS and Map Windows don't really have that. GBSIG does. GBSIG is set up like ArcView3 was set up with a project manager, and inside of that project you have various maps, you have views. So it's much more analogous to, at least historically, how the other commercial software operated, but
I'll throw in that I think QGIS actually has gotten a lot better in the last few years. It has a lot more control. You can do a lot more things with it now, I think, than even when I very first started using it a couple of years
and so,
ago.
for example, even knowing where it is gets a little screwy.
Yeah.
It's right. It's the print composer.
You just got to read the chapter. Got to come to my next webinar.
That's right. Exactly. Leslie's your connection. So you can see that you sort of have the different elements up here. Here's a vector legend, a scale bar, basic shapes, arrows, attribute tables, and you're adding a new map, which sort of seems strange to you, but you're really adding this map to this blank page that's going to be printed. So it's the type of thing that it takes a little bit of relearning, and yes, I don't think it's nearly as good as some of the commercial software, but I also think that considering that it's free and it does all these, has this advanced analytical capability, that most people can probably find something that's acceptable for them to use or to produce the map that they need to produce. Of course, part of that comes down to subjectivity and also how much intimate control you want over the map. Sometimes you just need to have, if you're just okay having it good enough and not having it look, exactly how you want it to look, then that's one thing. There's no doubt, though, that software like ArcGIS has more control. Does that sound decent to you, Leslie?
Yeah. Let's see. For small towns in Vermont and New Hampshire, does anyone do either? I think it's to either of us know of towns that are actually already using any of these software packages.
That's a very good question, and the answer is, I don't know.
And I'll just say, I think there are some only because I've had a lot of municipal people come to my trainings. I have no idea really how many of them are actually, using it as a result, but I know that there are a few. So yes, a few.
I think that one of the things that I need to do, and this is sort of thinking out loud, and this is also for Leslie, is to follow up. I followed up with people generally about these workshops, but I haven't followed up specifically on this open source software to see whether or not they're using it. Now, using it could be that there's somebody in the Conservation Commission in the town who is using it to make trail maps and then giving that data over to the GIS person who is then using ArcGIS to use it. So there's also those scenarios where it could be a component of what's going on and not the principal thing. But I think I definitely need to follow up on that. And I did have one feedback, one of the workshops that I taught years ago in New Hampshire, one of the pieces of feedback was that these GIS open source software packages were jokes, that they were toys, that I wasted their time by showing them to this because nobody could possibly use this software to do any real work. And this person obviously had a very strong opinion, and I didn't know who they were since it was a post-workshop evaluation, but in Spain, the region that GBSIG covers, Valencia, has probably 2.5 million people in it, and the third biggest city in Spain. And every single infrastructure project they do uses GBSIG and only GBSIG as their software. So to say that it can't be used is not true because it is being used. Whether or not people in New Hampshire, Vermont, in the U.S. have turned to this as their principal GIS solution for towns, I don't know. And that's something that I would love, and I'm sure Leslie would also love to know. There's no doubt in my mind that there are people who work in towns who are using this for something. Because I know that people from conservation commissions have come to take our class and walked away saying, I'm going to use this. And, from studies that have been done, the idea that somebody plans on using it, it's pretty closely correlated with them using it as long as they have a strong reason to do it. So, but that would be an excellent question to know the answer to more definitively.
So I've gotten a couple of questions that were similar that I'm going to answer just because I kind of already answered the people who asked them, but I realize now that since a couple different people asked, I'm going to go ahead and say this. And the question was basically had to do with, do you have to be using ArcGIS in order to use these, or do you have to do certain aspects of your work in ArcGIS and then, bring data or whatever into these open source ones? And as Shane was just explaining, this is the only GIS software that's used in certain places, and so the answer is no, you absolutely don't have to have paid for or be using ArcGIS in order to use these. These are standalone, full-on GIS software, they may not have every single capability of ArcGIS, but it's actually fairly close. I mean, it's all the basic stuff. And so, so yeah, just to make it clear, this is not, and these are not add-ons to ArcGIS in any way. They're standalone, separate things.
And the other quick question that people also have is, can you work, if you are using these, does that prohibit you from working with people who have ArcGIS or other types of commercial solutions?
Yep,
and the answer is no, it doesn't. The map itself, the thing you see on your screen, the composition of different layers, specific colors, their nice logo, all of that is trapped in the software itself. You can't open up a GBSIG map in Quantum GIS or a Quantum GIS map in ArcGIS, but what you can, of course, exchange are the data files. And at the end of the day, the data files are the things that are the most important. If your Conservation Commission maps new trails using AccuGlobe, or even if they have it, or Quantum GIS, they can take that data and they can give it to anybody. And anybody who has GIS software, regardless of what type of software, can use that to make a map.
And there's a bunch more good questions and comments here. There's a quick one, I think, about what languages are used for the scripting and automation that's going on in this. I don't know the answer to
that. You know what? I should know the answer to that. I'm sure that my guess is that most of these support Python. As far as any individual specific scripting that happens in the background, I'm not 100% sure. That's a good question for me to look into.
And given that they're open source, keep in mind that the answer to that you should be able to find by just going to the websites and dig around a little bit. Yeah. And then one of our participants sort of helped respond to that question about whether there are towns in Vermont and New Hampshire using these. And she said she works for Jamaica and Winhall. She uses ArcGIS in Jamaica to create parcel maps and QGIS in Winhall just to print out maps for customers. So right. We have at least one person saying, yes, it's definitely being used in a town.
Good to know.
Yeah. Oh, and so there's one other question that I kind of skipped. I hope the person who asked it is still here, but I was saving it for the end. Yes, he is. And that is how to get to your Facebook page. And I'll mention that we have a Facebook page too, so if you feel like going to ours as well, you can show him.
Yeah, I've sort of united everything that we do under the banner of GIS Workshop just to make it easier. So if you go to facebook.com/GIS Workshop. Nice. Yeah. So of course, but this is at least our site. There's several sites that I'm involved with, and of course I try to share things back and forth with VCGI's site as well. But this is everything that we do is /GIS Workshop. Like on Twitter, it's it's at GIS Workshops as well.
And
yours is Vermont Center for Geographic Information,
yeah, if you go down to your likes, I think we're in your likes.
Yeah, and I think you're right.
Well, that's going to
be
our
website. Right, I linked it to your site.
Yeah. No, I'm sorry, I'm not being clear. You're back at your page, down to the right underneath your picture.
Yep.
See where it says likes? If you just see all, I think we're in there.
Oh, yeah.
Whatever. If you just search for VCGI on Facebook, I think you'd find us too.
Yeah, I think it actually is because I went to it.
It's it's Vermont.Center. I think it's dot. No, I think it's dots. Not positive about that.
Oh well.
Yeah. And there was one more good question that I think the answer, unfortunately, might be no for both of us, but have you had experience with OpenGeoSuite or any of its component parts? PostGIS, GeoServer, GeoWebCache, OpenLayers, GeoEXT? And if so, can you recommend them?
No, I can't. You know, it's funny. I gave a talk at the New England ERISA meeting this past year, and another person giving a talk was about the web mapping side. Because what we talked about today was just the desktop GIS software, and there's a whole world which actually is much more developed when it comes to serving maps online. And I think, Leslie, that might be a good topic for you to think about for a webinar, or for me to think about.
Yep.
Is to have somebody
or for
who really
my upcoming
knows
roundtable.
A lot about the web map, because they are much more advanced, and they're used, I would say, a lot more than the desktop GIS, and they're often used in combination with some of the other proprietary solutions. So Unfortunately, I don't know, but I think we could find somebody who does. And I might even follow back up on that New England ERISA, look at who gave that presentation, or I guess it was more of an acceptance speech of an award that he got. But no, I don't know very much. I do know that all the GBSIG is also coming up with a way to have people take their maps in GBSIG and share them through one of those open source online mapping solutions. And of course, some people say, well, what's the difference? Why have a commercial package? Well, there's lots of reasons why you might want a commercial package, but one of the things that especially Esri has done very well recently is make data from their software on the desktop be able to be uploaded to the web and then be able to manage and deal with things online. And I think the desktop GIS software packages that are open source haven't quite gotten there yet. You can come up with a combination of open source web mapping and the desktop software, but integrated in some sort of a smooth, coherent package, I don't see that quite yet in the same way that things like ArcGIS Online are now doing for the commercial space. Sorry, don't know about that.
Yeah, I know. We both apologize for being a little bit ignorant about that. I will also throw out that I'm in the process of planning our next roundtable conference, which is going to happen May 8th, I believe. I need to send out a save the date thing. And I'm talking to two people that I know in Vermont who do work with open source GIS software about doing a kind of a half track, like maybe 3 topics on open source. And so I might check into them doing something about, I mean, they're one of the things we've talked about is some kind of overview of open source similar to this, but maybe we'll focus on web mapping instead, since you can't really do everything. So yeah, so that's a really good question, good suggestion.
Definitely.
So we have gone over our time, and I don't think, oh wait, there's one more. Oh, so the last question actually was, can these packages be used online on a server? If you mean online, the answer is no. These specific, well, actually, Map Window does have an online version, doesn't it?
You know, I think that all of these packages are moving in that direction because that's really where the commercial packages are going, but also just because that's what people want to do, is they want to take their data and make it available online. I mean, the way that I've reviewed them and what we're talking about is mostly focused on the desktop, but I think that's something that I obviously need to learn more about so that I can talk about it as part of these. And I also think that the idea of getting people that's what they have more specialty in to be part of the roundtable or webinars would be great, because I think often they don't know that much about what happens on the desktop because they're so focused on sort of the server version and how you move data and how you display data, where they might not think of it as a whole integrated package. And maybe that's one of the things that we can try to push out there, Leslie. How do you go from desktop to the web using these software packages? And they're getting there. They're certainly showing indications that they're moving in that direction, but I don't think they have quite as developed, again, as something like ArcGIS Online. Yeah. Maybe they never will. Maybe that's not what the open source community thinks is a priority. Or if it's so complicated they can't quite make it happen that way. But
so I think we managed to get through all of our questions. Thank you, everybody, for asking so many great questions. Excellent. And thank you, Shane, for doing this and for starting this conversation. I'm glad there's a lot of interest in open source. We can kind of keep pursuing this and all of us get a little bit more educated about it. So thanks to everybody, and remember, this is recorded and it'll be posted at our YouTube website, and I'll be sending out emails and posting messages in various places to remind everyone about our YouTube site and our Facebook page and everything else, so you can keep your eye open for that. Oh, and everyone will actually receive, for those of you who are still here, you're all going to receive an email asking you to fill out a little feedback form on your way out, so I appreciate it if you take time to do that. So thanks, Shane.
Thank you, Leslie, for organizing this.
Okay, have a good day.
You too.